All right, y'all. So my 25th year lifting anniversary Q&A. I've been doing this since this week in June, back in 1999, and time flew. So I'm proud of this one because to do something for 25 years, that's a big deal. But also hasn't felt like 25 years. It's been a blast, right? I think anyone who's like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and they're like, yeah, that went by quick. This has been it. So I wanted to start with this question because at some point I was a noob, like some of you guys out there. This question came from my boy Zach's Sean coach. I know Miss Sean, kid's a beast. He's a kid, but he's got a grown man physique, and he's gonna do some really good things in the natural bodybuilding world. So Sean asked, if you could go back to your 20s, what would you do differently? I would have invested so much more in my education, I think. So, first of all, there wasn't many good options, right? Like you guys, I didn't have things like the 3D Muscle Journey Vault, or like literally you can take what took me 10 years of like messy self-guided research and like in 1 year be caught up to speed, and less than that if you're like on it, right? So we didn't have resources like that. It was just kind of scattered. But what I could have done is like gotten a coach. I think a coach counts as investing into your education, especially if the coach is one of those coaches that's going to answer your questions, right? It's going to not just tell you what to do, but tell you why you're doing what you're doing. Highly important. That would have expedited so many things, kept me out of a lot of trouble. Like usually, like in my case, it was just like needless injuries. So yeah, I think investing in your education, and this is something that I see a lot of young people not do a good job with. I think supplements, they spend way too much there. And then like gym fashion, right? And I'm all for gym fashion, but it's like, do you really need another pair of leggings? Do you really need some more young law stuff? It's like, maybe you should invest in things that make the thing that clothes sits on like look better, feel better, do more, right? So I think that's what I would do differently. I would invest more in my education because it always, like, whatever it might be that you're paying up front, you get so much more in return. So I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have waited till like year 7 to get a coach, because that was basically all I had in terms of resources that were out there. But like young folks today, it's like, hey, invest in your education if you really about this and you really want to maximize this lifting thing. All right, question 2. This is by said Jim Kim. A lot of you guys are going to be like, oh, I know the answer. I'm gonna skip over this one, but I think that we're going to do something good with this, because a lot of you guys do know the answer. I don't think there is this huge difference between how like men and women should like train. I think it comes down to the individual. I know some women that I've had women who are like, have no interest in like growing my glutes. Crazy, right? I've had men who like legit just really only want to train their arms, like as like trainees. So at the end, it's like, what's your twist? What do you want to do? Yes, like for physique athletes, competitive physique athletes, they're constantly trying to bring up like genetically weaker body parts so that the package is better. But like outside of the sport, it really comes down to like what makes you happy. So I have no tattoos on me, but I kind of consider this like my body art. And I think that's how a lot of people, without thinking about it that way, see their bodybuilding. Most people want to train, or at a certain point they're like, maybe I should train everything for the sake of just like general health, orthopedic health, but they most of the time prioritize certain areas because that's what makes them happy. So at the end, I think the differences from this person to that person, and again, this is like even within like men, within women, it's more of a personal preference thing, right? So like, you design what you want. Like, it's like a tattoo in a way, right? It's like, express yourself, right? Like, do you want a big old booty? Do you want no booty? Do you want like big pecs, big shoulders, but not too interested in legs? That's cool. So yeah, I think that is how training differs from individual to individual. When we're not talking about like physique athletes that are trying to, you know, get this perfect symmetry or trying to fit in within the criteria of the division they compete in. Question 3, JBiz 121. What have you changed your stance on fitness-wise in the last 2 years, if anything? There always has to be something. People who don't, and especially in this field, because I think it's a young enough field where I think every 3 years you should be able to take a peek at some of your content and be like, oh, I kind of take that back. People who don't, what ends up happening is they kind of go dino and become extinct, right? And then, or like they stay around, but like the threshold for what is like a good coach / educator kind of jumps over them, and now they're kind of like bad at their job and they don't realize it, right? So yeah, we should constantly be able to like look back and be like, yeah, I need to update that. So for me, 2 things primarily I'd say is just the step count. Research like how that being a potato is no good when we're talking about all-cause mortality. In the past, I'd be like, you know what, I think if you're lifting, that's going to be plenty. Like lifting's a perfect exercise. Everything you need, you got with lifting. Okay, now I'm like, yes, strength train, but figure out a way to like get some steps in, to make it a part of your life. 6K, we can start with there, 7K, 8K. Yeah, so that's a big one. It used to be that steps was something that I would use with my athletes primarily when we're doing fat loss or you know, they have a super sedentary job and like their appetite kind of outpaces what they can like absorb calorically. But like now it's just one of those things where it's like, let's figure out a way to like keep you moving, right? Let's figure out a way to keep you around longer. So that's a big one, is just like the importance of like not being sedentary even if you lift. And I think the other one, this is just like my own anecdotes. And I think a lot of folks, like, you know, you got the evidence-based peeps, but you also want to hear from people who are kind of like in the trenches and trying to like just figure out things. And here's the deal. So volume, I think the evidence-based world, they're going to be very okay and sign off with the fact that, you know what, some people are probably going to do better with like sub 10 sets per body part. And then you have other folks that might do better with like over 20. And they're okay with that. But when it comes to like protein intake, like everyone kind of has their own threshold. It's like, oh, if you cross that line, it's like you're not being very like sciencey guy right now. So I'd say that for most folks, and this is especially when you're eating enough to grow, not so much when you're cutting. When you're eating enough to grow and your ceiling for anabolism is a little higher, I think some folks do better closer to like 1.5 grams per pound of lean body mass protein, and then other folks closer to 1. And I'd say like, hey, just kind of play around with both. Again, this is assuming like all the other stuff is in order, your training is in order, your sleep, the calories, again, all the basic stuff. What I have noticed is some folks tend to do better with slightly higher, some folks tend to do better with slightly lower, and then oddly enough, when it's time to diet, most people tend to do pretty well with like about 1 gram per pound. I think one, because everyone just kind of goes there for the most part, because you got to leave some room for the energy macros, right? So that you can like train hard. And because again, at that point, like our anabolism is kind of capped, right? We're just trying to like, yeah, not completely like fix a street, but just kind of fix potholes. That's what happens when you diet for the most part, realistically. So yeah, those are my 2 things. Up next, we got Christopher Arias Palomino, no underscore, but I nailed that. Are there benefits from doing a strength phase for bodybuilding? Yeah, I think so. Okay, I'll give you, I guess, one connect the dots reason, and then one just like a little more goofy and out there, and remembering that, like, you know, these bodybuilders are people at the end, right? So what it's gonna do is when you work on getting stronger on these compounds, and again, it doesn't mean squat, bench, deadlift. I mean, it can mean like a leg press, it can mean a hack squat, it could mean like this chest press machine, it could be like weighted pull-ups, whatever. It's going to improve how well you perform in a lot of the rep ranges that are above the, I guess, RMs, whether it was a 1 RM, 3 RM, 5 RM. You improve those, your 8 rep max is probably going to go up. Your 10 rep capabilities is probably going to go up. You're probably going to be able to use more load on those. So, and usually like quite immediately. So, yeah, I think working on the neurological side of things, not a bad idea. I think it's a great way to, hey, kind of, it's an option. Like if you're trying to fight off a plateau. But I think the other thing is that like people just get bored, bro. So a little texture here and there, and I do it both ways. Like sometimes it's a strength phase, sometimes it's like a pumpy block, right? Because people just get bored. So a little variety, and both these things, whether it's like the strength or the pumpy stuff, I do think in the right context they can help people get through plateaus. But I think also something that's highly underrated is just the fact that it gives you something new to work with, so that when you get back to your more, like, I guess, super bodybuilding specific training, you're like excited to jump into it and find yourself in another plateau a few weeks later, right? So yeah, absolutely. And not only that, but like feeling strong is I don't know, like it's just as cool as like feeling jacked in some ways. Next, Arvin K1B. Should you keep volume the same, increase, or reduce it when cutting? So this is my speculation that there is this inverse U when it comes to volume and hypertrophy. And what ends up happening is when you're dieting, it's more of like an inverse V. So it's just like, it's sharp. So you get to that place where it kind of peaks out. I think if you're eating enough, what ends up happening is that there's actually a little like upwards trend, and it runs for a while before you kind of start to slide into the negative. So again, you could have like one guy or this guy, the same person, right? Like if they were using 12 sets, they'd be here for this body part. And if they're using, I don't know, 30 sets, they'd kind of be at the same place. They're just working really hard to net the same amount of progress. But again, they kind of flatline, not flatline, but you know what I'm saying. It's like a big inverse U, right? But when you're dieting, it's like you get a good idea of where that cliff is, right? Just how all other stresses in life become, and you just become so much more transparent when you are dieting, right? Like the things that kind of are pet peeves become like major annoyances, right? You're so much more self-aware of these things. So what I think a lot of people should do is look at what that threshold like seems to be when they're dieting, assuming you're not doing anything crazy when you're dieting. And we're not talking like ultra like lean, like single digit body fat, but look at like where you're training, or pay attention to like where your training starts to feel like excess volume wise when you are dieting. And I suspect most likely that threshold when you are gaining is probably pretty similar to that, like set per body part wise. And for some people, like actually what ends up taking place is like they have just more punching power when they are well fed and bigger and not dieting, that like it might actually like come down a little bit, like set like the volume, right? So again, like, oh god, there's so like, context matters, right? But generally speaking, what I'm trying to tell you here is like the threshold seems to be the same for most people. And people who end up having to take off a lot of volume when they're dieting, it's because they were probably using too much during the gaining phase. It's just that like now being in a hypocaloric state made that very obvious to them. My boy JSRex456, that's my boy, and I'm not just saying because we rock a similar look, like that's my boy. I know a lot of you guys, some good folks, man. His question: what diet habit or habits have been the most consistent over these 25 years? I think one thing I did really good was I didn't take on too much too soon. So as I was building my good habit collection, I didn't do everything at once. So I remember at first I was just a teenager. Okay, I just go lift weights. I had like my cartoony breakfast cereal, different kinds of like chips, microwavable pizza inspired things, right? But eventually, as I learned more, and I'm like, oh, okay, protein after training, right? I mean, that's not the whole story, but like that's where I started. So okay, I'm gonna have a little bit of that, and then eventually it's like, oh, a gram per pound. Oh, I gotta eat enough calories. And I think a lot of this came at the right pace, just because I got lucky. But I think eventually it did get to the point where I wouldn't take on something unless I was sure that I could do a pretty decent job. So like I had mastered what I was trying to master before, and then it's like, all right, now that I have protein consistently after training, I'm gonna try to have a gram per pound, right? Okay, now that I've eaten a serving of vegetable every day for the past 2 months, I'm gonna try to aim for 2. So I was very patient when it came to not overloading myself when it comes to like an eating to-do list, because it's very easy to do that, right? Because it's the one part about bodybuilding that follows you everywhere. So if there's one thing I did right on that front, it was basically not overwhelming myself, not giving myself like too much too soon. I made sure that the things I was trying to get good at, they weren't always correct, but the things that I was trying to master, right? Okay, those things are solid. Okay, now it's solid. Okay, now I can add that other thing. So yeah, and if I wasn't doing a good job at these things, I would usually do a very good job of, all right, I'm gonna tone it down, like not necessarily be like, forget this. If I can't be perfect, why do it? I would usually tone it down a little bit, work on that. Okay, now we mastered it. Okay, let's bring that thing back in. So yeah, I was just patient when it came to growing a good base of good habits. And I think sometimes that's where people go wrong. They just try to be perfect and do everything from day one. That's hard to do, and for most folks, you don't have to even do that. You don't, like, your goal probably doesn't require you to be perfect. All right, here we go, Christine. This is a good question. How do you as an athlete and coach balance the mindset between humility and confidence? All right. So I think, one has humility because you don't know everything, you don't have everything figured out, but the confidence, I think, kind of coexists well with it, because you're okay you're perfectly fine with like failing, trying your hardest. So I think that's how those two things coexist together, right? You're humbled because it's like, I don't know everything. I know that I am going to make some mistakes along the way, but I'm not afraid to mess up and see and have everyone watch me like mess up, come up short. And I think this is and it's important that if you want to give the well calculated and thought out plan approach, like whether it's you as a coach with your athlete or you yourself as an athlete, that like you hit the ground running with a lot of confidence and like some buy-in when it comes to the plan, so that you can really eventually get back to the drawing board, analyze how well it went, and see like what you have to adjust. So I think these two things like coexist. Obviously there's some people who are just like confident for like no reason. But then there's that other brand of confidence where it's like, oh my God, like this person, like they're just doing life, like in a way where it's like, they're just dancing and they don't care if they look like a fool, right? Because they're gonna enjoy this thing, they're gonna do their best and figure some things out. So yeah, I think those two things, they actually mesh well together. All right, Chris Fossil Hall. Are the standards for novice divisions in bodybuilding higher today? Yeah, absolutely. So I'd say that So typically, like when you have the bell curve, right, and like where most people are kind of in the middle, I think as we improve as a sport when it comes to our methods, and a lot of this like in part thanks to science, well, it's not necessarily like the super low responders that benefit a whole lot. Like super low responders, like we probably don't have a lot of them. Like tuning in, they probably try lifting, didn't like it. They're out there running marathons, right? So, and then like the hyper responders, like anything works, and it's not like they don't gotta learn from anyone because everything works, right? But it's kind of the people like in the middle of that bell curve. Like those are the folks that are impacted the most when we figure out better ways to do things. So, and that just happens to be where a lot of these like novice folks that you speak of, like that's where they roam. So absolutely. I think, yeah, what's your average person that's like 2 years into lifting, 3, 5, like they just, on average, I think they look better. And I think this is a big one for me. It's like usually, like I think now more than ever, when I compare what the people look like around me when I was going to the gym, like as a kid in the 90s and early 2000s, yeah, dude, like on average, like everyone just looks a whole lot better. So yeah, we're coming up. All right, Lucas de Oliveira, 1997. Have you ever used Yohimbine? If so, what's your experience? Yeah, I have. Okay, so I've used it. I've had my athletes try it, and same old story. Like it's the best way I can describe Yohimbine is that you kind of feel like you are in a room the size of a Christmas tree box. So like you can fit in there, right? Assuming it's just big enough for you, like, but it's like made out of yellow tile and no windows, and that's what it feels like. So anxiety is like what everyone gets, and I just haven't seen much of a difference when it comes to, because I've ran preps with it, preps without it, and I mean it's one of those things that mechanistically makes sense, but like when rubber hits the road, I haven't noticed any difference at all. And most people who are like, come on coach, let me give it a try, I tell them, and most of the time they try it and they're like, I'm done, I should have listened. So yeah, that's my experience with Yohimbine. Guys, that was my 25 years of lifting anniversary Q&A. If you enjoyed that, let me know so that when I make it to my 50-year anniversary, we'll have another Q&A.